Tonight, our area bracing for yet another storm, the second nor'easter in less than a week. The last one, mostly rain and wind, and people still recovering. This one, wind and snow, we're tracking it. We're also keeping an eye on the chaos at the White House, and shocker, there was more today. Another top advisor stepping down now, but President Trump says everything is all under control. But just looking at the past week, sure doesn't seem that way. Then a major development in the Prococo corruption trial, and this one could end it sooner rather than later. We are at the courthouse with the very latest. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Con Edison, they're taking a ton of heat for its handling, or should I say mishandling, of the nor'easter that blasted the tri-state area this past Friday. And with the snowstorm heading our way, we are looking at a double whammy. At its peak, 250,000 homes lost power, and 4 days later, many thousands still in the dark. Westchester, it is in the worst shape. More than 50,000 still without power. In Jersey, about 38,000. On Long Island, fewer than 200 homes without power. There are several power companies that service our area, but Con Ed, it is the one that is really getting scrutinized, and for good reason. The criticism hits the utility on just about every front. It committed the original sin of not being prepared. It also didn't have enough people ready to deal with the storm, which was on the radar for several days. And its communication with customers, well, to put it politely, was terrible. People had no idea when the power would come back on, and in many cases, they were given time frames that weren't even close to reasonable, let alone accurate. But late this afternoon, Con Ed defended itself against all that criticism. Here's CEO John McAvoy.
We have 1,700 workers out there. That is a very large deployment, and it matches what we had during Hurricane Irene, which was a very significant deployment that occurred in 2011, for those of you who remember it. And so we have people throughout the area. So somebody may not always see somebody on their block or where they think the damage is, but we have a tremendous allocation of resources. There is nothing that I would categorize now as a mistake or a failure at this point.
That opinion not widely shared. Things are so bad that Governor Cuomo has directed the Public Safety Department to investigate what went wrong with the utility companies, and most specifically Con Ed. Now, so many people lost their heat and lights in Westchester County. The county center was opened up so people could warm up for at least a few hours. And County Exec George Latimer, he's pointing fingers directly at Con Ed.
Not only did you underestimate the problem beforehand, but as you're solving the problem, you're underestimating the complexity of the problem. And I've served in corporate America. That kind of a performance in my life in corporate America gets me fired. You know, they fire me for something like that. They say, what's your prediction? We'll be back online in 24 hours, boss. And when you're not, you said it, you made the assessment, you're out. So I'm just expressing the frustration that people are expressing by not having power and by not seeing the entity reach goals that they set themselves. At the top, wherever the decisions are being made or not made, is where the failure is here. And obviously, you know, something happens in county government, ultimately it's going to be my failure. It's not going to belong to anybody else but me at the top of the pyramid. And that's the same for the circumstances, I think, in these agencies.
Now, give you an idea how hard the county was hit here. Trees knocked down everywhere, fell onto houses, roads, power lines. For those of you who've got power that are watching me that lost it before, I'm not telling you something you don't see or already know. Residents and business owners growing very short when it comes to patience.
There's so many trees, there's so many issues with the power lines here that it happens a lot. More often than I'd like, unfortunately. So I really hope they can address this issue and figure out better solutions with the power lines.
Now, it's not just Westchester obviously hit. Out on Long Island, people still also trying to recover, although the numbers far more optimistic when it comes to folks who've regained power. Now, this homeowner in Great Neck dealing with a massive tree that crashed into the house.
I didn't understand what happened until I went upstairs and saw the devastation, but it's beyond belief. It's devastating, I think, mostly like for the kids who I underestimated how attached they are, and you know, they lived all their life here.
Listen, we want to get into not just the weather, which I'll do later on in the program as to the approaching storm here, but how, as we sit here on Tuesday night, so many people are in a position that they frankly found themselves days ago when they were promised the problem would have been fixed. There is a ton of frustration with Con Ed, and you don't have to take my word for it. Fox 1 anchor Brian Webb, he's been tracking it on social media, and he's got a small sample of just how frustrated people are.
So after several days with no lights and no heat, another storm on the way, many Con Edison customers have had enough, and they are taking to social media to let the whole world know about it. Here up is the first example. This one is from Megan Leap. She writes, "Hey Con Ed, no one has been out to Scarsdale to fix this since the tree was cleared from the road Saturday. This is a main power line leaving hundreds without power in Scarsdale. Now the snow is coming tonight. Please help us. We are powerless." Up next, this one from BV. "My restoration estimate is still 11 p.m. tonight, yet haven't seen a Con Ed truck in over 2 days. Literally zero evidence of work anywhere in my town or neighboring towns." Up next, Bernie P. writes, "Haven't had power since Friday. We've thrown out 2 refrigerator and 2 freezers worth of food. Our pipes will probably freeze by tomorrow. To top it off, Con Ed can't give me an answer as to when our power will be back on. Unacceptable." And finally, Oliver Bell writes, "The biggest complaint people have about Con Ed is they can't provide any meaningful info. You put an estimated repair time, 11 p.m. Tuesday, on your website for the whole county. We know that is a lie. Please tell us where your crews will be today and what time." So, several Con Ed customers understandably upset, still in the dark, another strong storm heading their way, and not getting the answers they want to hear. I'm Brian Webb, FiOS 1 News.
All right, and finally, obviously all over the Con Ed story. So is the Journal News. We partnered with on a lot of projects, and they went after the power company. Look at the front page. It kind of speaks for itself. Ridiculous. 6 years after Sandy, Con Edison woefully unprepared for the storm. And joining us now, senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman and Frank Scandale from the Journal News. He's director of investigations. And Frank, I went through your coverage of it, and you hit it, which is at the beginning they weren't ready for this thing. When it happened, to me, the biggest mistake these guys make is they're not upfront with people, and they don't give them the straight reality, at least to prepare them for what to expect as to when the cavalry will or won't come. And then finally here, they're not ready for the next one, it seems. I mean, this call that went out for everybody, the cavalry, to come from all the other places, they did this late again. I mean, they really dropped the ball here.
Well, Jorge Fitzgibbon, who was sort of put on the watchdog part of this. We have a team working on this, as you know, Richard.
Yep.
But Jorge went into it yesterday, and he dug out some reports. So he dug out after Sandy, you know, everybody said, we got to fix this. So he's got a report that said, from Con Ed, we put $1 billion into this to fix. We had, you know, all these switches and lines and things that were supposed to be halting further damage, et cetera. So they said they put $1 billion in, and it's scary. There's a quote today that says, it could have been worse, right? If they didn't put in this $1 billion, this would have been worse. So I can only imagine what that is. He also found in, you know, other reports, assessments, and the assessments were they weren't ready back then. So flash forward, so that's basically people's main concern. We had this before, you looked at it, you should have been ready, you're not ready. And that's where things go from now. So we have a person, say, in Mount Pleasant, I believe, in a cul-de-sac, and David Robinson wrote that. So she said, we've been here for days, there's a tree, we can't get out, we've got kids, we're a little nervous, da-da-da. Dave writes the story. In the middle of the story, she calls back and says, oh, they're here, the crews are here, there's a crew from Canada. He said, okay, so we're changing the story. This morning we walk in and said, guess what? The Canada crew said, oh, we weren't ready. We don't have live wires. We can't deal with this. So you're right. The coordination is really at the heart of this. The coordination and the information, everybody's saying, you know, we got a call saying our power will be back. It's not back. We got a call saying our power will be restored. It was never missing. So there's all that. So there's no central coordination, it seems, in this effort.
And Andrew, we've been fighting. We literally have to shame some of these utilities, most specifically Con Ed, to talk to us under the threat of saying that they will refuse to answer for them to even have some of these conversations. The paper said it today. there's not been a learning curve. You covered Sandy with me 5 years ago. What were the biggest frustrations of people? Not just they didn't have power, right? But it's that they were being told, we'll be there in 3 hours, and they don't see him for 3 days.
Yeah, it was the delays and the fact that people had no idea. When you're trying to make plans, particularly the family that, Brian read the tweet about the family that had to throw out 2 refrigerators full of food. Where are you going to stay? Where are you going to put the family? For how long do you have to try to find alternate shelter? I mean, it's not just the daily upset, it's that it uproots absolutely everything, and without that sort of information or promise as to when it's going to get better. And then there's the creeping fear factor too, which is if this goes much longer, there's additional damage that could come to my house. The frozen pipes, or having to leave the house for an indeterminate period of time, that sort of thing.
And you know what? Listen, more power to the county here. They're opening up warming centers and all the rest. But I didn't realize those things are open from 10A to 10P. Come 10P, we did a story on this earlier, people are going into their cars for heat. And it was after Sandy, the devastation was so pronounced, people created shelters where people were living. In this particular case, and I'm not connoting this is the same as Sandy, we have temporary setups. You can't find a hotel room if you want to around here. I mean, we're trying for staff. I mean, the amount of calls we had to make to try and find an open bed. If you don't have relatives that have power that you can stay at, you got a problem for yourself here. Literally, people sleeping with their kids in cars, not because they can't find a place to go.
No, we can't have that. Again, so you look at what's going to happen, right? So they're talking about, as of tomorrow morning, I think they said 17,000 or 14,000 will not have power as of tomorrow morning. But now they're talking about Friday after the next storm. Yep. So now you've got another wave of this, and that's what I think people are really starting to freak out about, because this is not going to be easy. They're talking about a heavy, wet snow, more trees are guaranteed to come down. This is reminiscent of not only Sandy, but you remember the big snowstorm after Sandy, the falls?
Oh, don't remind me.
Couple of quick things I just want to get in. First of all, it's not a money issue for Con Edison, right? I know they raised rates last year 7%, but it's not like Con Edison is crying poverty and that's why they can't do all this, right?
They're not actually. It's an interesting thing to say that, because Jorge came up with he went to their website, he went to Yahoo or whatever, and he's got the financials. So they made $1.5 billion last year, right? So they say it's not the manpower issue. Yeah. They say it's not a manpower issue, and Cuomo agreed to it. So, okay, so they originally said 1,000, now they're up to 1,700 workers, but they can't get these other people from mutual aid. So if it's not a manpower problem and it's not a money problem, what is the problem, right? You would think if you double the resources, you could have the time.
Just explain what Frank was saying. Mutual aid, it kind of means what it sounds like. You put the flare up in effect and say, all right, guys, I need help from wherever it are. You have people literally from Canada down here right now. In fact, I met a guy from Ottawa who's down here from one of their utilities companies that come from the Midwest or wherever. The argument that Con Ed and others have said is this was so widespread, people couldn't come from other places, except we found out in our reporting, some of the utilities asked for aid far sooner than Con Ed did, and as a result, they got more boots on the ground. So that part to me. Plus, I also know they have crews that are still in Puerto Rico. Right. And while that's terrific, if you know you're going to be shorthanded and you don't have some of the guys you normally would have, then why didn't you ask for help earlier? And this second go around, they just asked yesterday for more help from mutual aid. Why do they think they're going to be here in time? I don't know. One
more thing I just want to touch on. I mentioned the fare hike from Con Edison. That had to be approved by the Public Service Commission because these are public utilities. So the Public Service Commission is their regulator, and they're the ones who the governor is asking to look into how everything went bad. But I'm wondering if this is a matter of not keeping up and making sure that they have the structure in place to be able to respond to these things. It's one thing after the fact to bring your regulatory agency and say, where were the mistakes? But did the Public Service Commission, did the regulators drop the ball? And we've heard this not just in power, but in all sorts of industries. But was there enough regulation to make sure that these companies were prepared for these kinds of storms?
Nobody has stepped up to the plate that said this is my fault. It's kind of interesting. So the public utilities in New York, the statement was pretty much like Governor Cuomo saying, this is unacceptable. Okay.
But so where does that buck stop? Yeah.
Where's the hammer? Yeah. And that's a question that Mark Longriello has asked, George Latimer basically saying, so what can you do? Mike Kaplowitz stormed into a nice egg office today in Brewster. We have a story that should be online now, because he doesn't have any power. So he goes running in there saying, hey, I just want to talk to somebody about when this is going to be fixed. And he said they've got other meetings with Con Ed. He said, next time I'm calling for an appointment, because he said, I don't want to get thrown out. So there's a mounting frustration on our elected officials who you would turn to and say, okay, who's going to make this go away? Who's going to fix this?
I was
And right now,
the
we're not
smartest
seeing that.
politicians,
We're not seeing
they
that.
jumped on this first, right? And
Yeah,
they said,
absolutely.
bleep, fill in the utility, right? And told all of them, get mad at them. But Andrew asked the magic question that you guys have been looking into. Who's policing them, right? And at the end of the day, if the county executive said, I have no authority over the utility, and the governor's saying, well, somebody's got to look into it, where's the buck stop, right?
Right.
So,
And that's the frustration of the citizens who are, they're looking to us, they're calling you, and we're trying to get these answers. But right now, there's a lot of this.
absolutely. And some are doing a much better job than others. And I know you guys have been doing a great job at the paper and continue to. So, Frank, thank you. All right, coming up next, everybody. In just the past week, the president's encouraged a trade war. He spoke about getting rid of due process. And again, he had to deny accusations of an affair with a porn star. Imagine just for a moment, in an alternative universe, if the last guy did this. If Barack Obama did those things, what would the reaction have been? Well, we'll take a look at that hypothetical right after this.